Hello and welcome to another episode of Nathan Builds Robots. Today we're going to be doing a 3D printer tier list. So I'm going to be going over what are, in my opinion, the most relevant 3D printers on the market in the year 2024. This is around Black Friday time, so a lot of these printers are on sale too. So whether you're shopping for a new 3D printer or you're just curious where the rankings are at in the mind of Nathan Builds Robots, this is going to be the perfect video for you. We're going to go over all these printers and I'm going to assign an overall rank to the company and then also assign rankings for each of their most relevant printers. Before we get started with this, I should disclose that I've bought a lot of printers from this list, but also a lot of these printers were sent to me free of charge from the manufacturers. A lot of these companies have sponsored content on my channel. Every single company on this list has sent me a printer for free. So hopefully that balances things out a little bit. I'm going to try and keep this video as unbiased as possible, but there's inevitably going to be some bias here because Nathan Builds Robots is the most biased source of 3D printer news. Alright, so let's start things off right with the largest manufacturer of 3D printers by volume, and that's going to be Creality. We're going to go ahead and put them in S. No, I'm just kidding. So Creality is a significant company because they produce a ton of 3D printers. A lot of people who are into the hobby right now got their start on an old Ender 3, which is both a blessing and a curse for them. Being so popular in the early days of 3D printing gains them a lot of brand recognition, but back then 3D printers weren't that good, so a lot of people will be like, oh man, I remember back when I had my Ender 3 V2, and that thing sucked. It would break all the time. And yeah, I got to agree with that. Those things kind of did suck. But they got excellent print quality and they were super cheap, and it was the entry point for a lot of people getting into the hobby. So based on that, I would give them an S tier, but in the 2 to 3 years between the launch of the CR10 and the Ender 3, which were super popular printers that put Creality on the map, they released a bunch of derivatives of those products and never really made the next step into building a super innovative product. Add to that, in a lot of those launches, the quality control wasn't excellent. Lately, I think they've really been trying to turn things around. The last 2 or 3 printers that I've got from them, the Creality K2 Plus, the Ender 3 V3 Plus, and the Ender 3 V3, all of those ran really well right out of the box. They didn't have any quality control issues. On the Ender 3 V3 series, there were a couple small little design mistakes in my opinion, like placing the spool in the wrong location. But in terms of the overall design and the electronics and the build, I think they were pretty good, and they printed out parts with great quality and were really reliable. So we're gonna bump them up to B. I'm not gonna give them an A or an S tier rating just because they haven't earned it yet. Creality really needs to stay on this track of making great products, and I think eventually we'll promote them all the way up to S tier, but they have to really, earn back the trust that they lost with a lot of consumers. All right, now let's talk about the individual printers in Creality's lineup. So we've got the K2 Plus. They sent that over to me to review, and I absolutely love that thing. It's super huge, it's fast, it's got multicolor capabilities. There's really not much to dislike about that printer, especially in my use case. I haven't had really any problems with it, except for one print where I caused the poop chute to get backed up, and it was a big mess. But apparently they're working on a firmware fix for that where it'll detect if that area is getting clogged up and it'll pause the print automatically. In terms of hardware, sensors, and electronics, there was no failures there. So I think this thing is really built to last. It's super solid, it's gigantic, it can print out all the things that I need. So I'm definitely giving that an S tier rating. And they just opened up more pre-sales on that. I've made a bunch of videos about it in the last week because people seem to be watching it, so I've been making a lot of videos. So if you want to see more content about that K2 Plus, I'll link some videos in the description below, and there's also a link if you want to pick one up. They've been getting hit with a lot of pre-orders because a lot of people want to buy this machine. It's saying if you buy it now, the orders will start shipping on December 5th, but I think that's actually going to be pushed out a little bit further. Now, it is a super expensive high-end printer that's going to be well in excess of what most people need. You got to ask yourself, do you really need a $1,300 printer? Most people don't. But if you have the money for it, or if you have a business need for it, then it could be a really good choice for you. For me, I really love how I'm able to print out full-size parts for all of my prototypes, so it's been really valuable in that use case. Next on the list, we have the Ender 3 V3 Plus. I'm going to give that a B tier. It's a solid printer, it gets the job done, it's fast, it's relatively large, but there's nothing about it that's like super exceptional, and it is pretty expensive for what it is. This next one is the Ender 3 V3 SE. This is on sale for, I think, $169 right now. That's exceptionally cheap. That's like going back to the old school Ender 3 pricing where these things were super inexpensive. And the last one on this list is actually the CRM4. I really like that machine. It's a relatively big build volume. I think it's $700, and I think it has the best build quality out of all the large format bed slingers that I've tested. You're also going to want to pair that with a hot end or a nozzle upgrade with that large of a build volume. Squeezing filament out of a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, that's going to take forever. All right, next up we have Flashforge. Now, Flashforge, I've talked to them at a couple of conventions, and I've been able to test out one of their printers. I got the Adventure 5M Pro for review, and I really liked it. I think Flashforge as a company, they are just more professional than other companies in the list, and it sounds like their bread and butter product is this wax jet printer. So instead of printing regular plastics, it uses little inkjet cartridges that have wax in them. So they're able to make lost wax molds for really high-end jewelry and then pour molten gold into it and get really intricate details. And apparently it helps speed up the workflow of a lot of jewelry manufacturing, which has become increasingly digital over the last couple decades. So Flashforge, I think they're a super professional company. I'd either put them in S tier or A tier. What I like about their FDM product line is they all have these quick swap nozzles. You just squeeze the print head, there's a button on either side, you just squeeze it and it pops the print head out, and you can install a different size nozzle. So if you had a clog or want to just change nozzle sizes, it's really easy to do that. And for that reason alone, if I had to manage like a couple hundred 3D printers, I might prefer to use these Flashforge printers because, you know, the most common troubleshooting you have to do on a 3D printer is a clogged nozzle, or you might have to change nozzles between materials, or you want to switch nozzles to make different types of objects. This is the Adventure 5M. It's got no side panels. It's very similar to a Bambu Lab P1P, but look at that price. That is very affordable. It's got that fast nozzle change system, fast and reliable, and it's got a 220 by 220 build area. So it's about the same size as an Ender 3 in terms of the print volume. Some people might want a little more than that, but for basic small parts, I think this would be an excellent printer. It's got a touch screen, easy to use, lightweight, and apparently you can print out your own enclosure if you feel so inclined. Or you can buy the enclosure kit, which I would guess comes with the clear plastic panels that you can attach to the side. For $1 extra, you can get an additional 0.8 millimeter nozzle, which is actually a great deal because on the system, you know, you have the advantage of those quick nozzle changes, but you have the disadvantage of those nozzles being somewhat expensive. They're like $30 to $50 a piece. So being able to get one on sale here, where it only costs an extra $1 to get an extra nozzle, would be really nice. If you want a basic printer like this with a basic enclosure, then you can go for it, but I'd actually prefer to upgrade to the Adventure 5M Pro. It's a little bit more expensive, but this machine is really awesome. I had it in my office, and it was the least noticeable printer in my experience of any of the printers that I've run because it's so quiet, and also it has a really advanced filtration system. So most printers, when you turn this vent on, you've got these little filter elements in the back, and it pulls the air through that and spits it out the back of the printer. Well, on this printer, they actually have an advanced system that allows a little flap to change positions inside of the printer, and it can switch between recirculated air and blowing the air outside. So it's just like in your car where you have the recirculated air button. You can press that like if you're driving past a skunk or something, and then it'll recirculate that air and prevent you from inhaling whatever's outside. What I really like about these filtering elements is they're using HEPA filters, but a lot of companies are just putting carbon filters on their machines, which doesn't filter out the main source of particle generation, which is just like essentially smoke coming off of the hot end, because the hot end's so hot, it generates little smoke soot particles that float around your room. That's why you definitely want to have a well-ventilated room. I did a whole episode about this where I got a particle counter and I tested the air quality in my printing room. And basically, when you have a HEPA filter like this, it's going to filter out those particles so they're not an issue. And that's why I had a very difficult time smelling what was going on when this printer was running. So it's just doing a much better job of filtering out the air. This would be the best printer to get if your wife or significant other didn't want you to get another printer and you wanted to hide it in a cabinet somewhere where they couldn't find it. This one, it's super quiet and it basically makes no smell because of that internal filtration system. That's more advanced than any other printer that I've used. So big fan of this printer. Let's go back to our tier list. I'm going to give this one, I kind of want to give it an S tier rating. It's really good. It's a little more proprietary than I like, but you're getting a lot of convenience for that cost. So I don't know if it's quite S tier material, just because the size and the lack of multicolor printing. I wish it had those features, but I'll give it an S tier. There's something to be said for having a super quiet and unnoticeable printer for environments like, let's say you're in an office and you don't want to stink up the place. I think this would be a great option for that. Or if you're in a library or a classroom and you want to have it running in the background and not be distracting. Again, it's a really great printer, and it's super fast, just like all the modern Core XY printers are.
Our engineer told me that he designed a machine for the naughty boys that prints their model when their parents are sleeping.
Let's wrap up the discussion of Flashforge's offerings by talking about the ADV5X. Apparently that's coming out in 3 days, so I haven't seen it. Apparently I'm getting one to review, but I'm expecting this to be a really awesome printer. One of the advantages that they have on this machine is they've built the multi-material unit into the printer itself. So on most printers you have an external box or an external like filament stand that you have to install to get everything to work. On this one, everything's built into the printer itself, so it's just one unit that you install in place. You attach your filaments to it and you're able to start printing. For me, I noticed that any printers that I get the multi-material units on, like on my PRUSA MK4, it adds in a bunch of additional bulk to that printer, so it makes me use it less often, because in my office I'm moving my printers around all the time and having to take all these pieces and kind of clump them together and move them to a new location. Or put them under the desk or whatever, it becomes a real pain. With this one, since everything's built onto the printer itself, that's going to be super convenient. They also teased its ability to print with TPU, and that's been a common complaint with users when they're using their multi-material systems. They can't do TPU because it's hard to feed through the tubes to get everything to work properly. But with this one, apparently they can do multicolor TPU printing, which, you know, sets it apart in another way. So I really like what Flashforge is doing. They're actually advancing the forefront of 3D printing technology, making things more convenient, and letting you do things that you couldn't do before, and also offering these at really good prices. I'm not sure what this one's going to cost, but given that the last two printers were sub $500, I bet this thing's going to be super competitive on cost, and it'll be super capable. Now, interestingly, this one has little spots for filters in the back. So I'm not sure if those filters are going to be populated or if they're going to be offering a Pro model to go along with this. I imagine they will at some point. We'll have to wait and see what comes out with that. I'm really looking forward to seeing you know, what they have to show off. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up in the early S tier. I think having a really inexpensive, compact, multicolor printer that can support TPU, that's going to be pretty cool. Okay, now let's talk about Elegoo. Now, Elegoo is a company that I have a long history with. 10 years ago, I used to buy their products because they used to sell Arduinos. But since then, they've started selling resin printers, and in the recent years, they've been selling FDM printers. What I like about Elegoo is they always have an eye on producing quality at low prices. I'm a bit of a cheapo when I'm trying to buy my stuff, and I definitely pay attention to the prices. Something I noticed about Elegoo is they're consistently less expensive than you think they're going to be for all the features and size that you get. Unlike Creality, they actually have been paying attention to the market and producing things that fill niches and price points that aren't otherwise addressed. And also they don't release products that are redundant or unnecessary. So I really like Elegoo. I think they're producing some good stuff, and I'm going to give them an A tier overall. The three printers that I've chosen to rank here are their Neptune 4 series. I think all of these Neptune 4s are relatively good. This is the standard size Neptune 4. I'm going to give that a B tier. Then there's the Neptune 4 Plus. We'll give that an A tier. And then the Neptune 4 Max. We're going to give that an S tier. Here's the whole lineup that I was just talking about. Here's the Neptune 4 Max, the Neptune 4 Plus, and the Neptune 4 and Neptune 4 Pro. What I really like about this series of printers is, well, the Neptune 4 starts at a really low price point. It's going to be a little bit faster and more modding friendly compared to the Ender 3 V3 SE that I was talking about earlier, but it's also going to lack the automatic Z offset functionality. So that's a little inconvenient. It says it's sold out right now, but hopefully they'll get some more of those in stock. Fortunately, the Neptune 4 Max is still in stock, which I think is the star of their lineup. The Neptune 4 Plus offers the best compromise between size and value, but this Neptune 4 Max is absolutely insane. You're getting a 420 by 420 by 480 build volume. That's absolutely massive, and it's really not even that expensive. You're going to save money by picking one of these up to print large objects, and you're probably going to put that money towards filament, because to build large objects like this, you end up using a lot of filament. But yeah, that's an insane price for being able to get that much build volume. Let's say you're into cosplay or you're into printing out scale models of stuff. Having that extra build volume is going to be super nice. Some other things that I noticed when I was browsing the Elegoo product lineup is this Fecta. I don't know what this name is. The Elegoo Fecta. It's a laser engraver and cutter. I don't like to feature laser engravers and cutters on my channel because they're kind of a pain to use. You really have to have a well-ventilated area to set them up and run them. And then there's always the risk of laser radiation that can cause blindness or burning. So I generally tend to stay away from these, but this is a really, really good price for a laser engraver. And it's coming from a brand name like Elegoo, which tends to produce pretty good stuff. So if you really wanted a basic laser engraver, that's a pretty good deal. Then also there's the meme machine, the Elegoo Orange Storm Giga.
This printer is the Orange Storm Giga.
And you can pre-order it now. It looks like they're going to ship out in around Christmas time. And if you wanted an absolutely ginormous printer, this thing is 800 by 800 by 1 meter tall. So really massive build volume, bigger than anything else that I've ever seen in this price range. If you had a special application where you really needed to build absolutely gigantic stuff like furniture or, I don't know, just big parts, then you could think about picking one of these up. It is more expensive than what most people need, and actually building parts this large in practice isn't very practical, just because it takes days, if not weeks, to build things that fill up this entire print volume. You might have to look into doing some upgrades to the hot end. We'll have to check in with 3D Printing Nerd and see how his project's going with Luke's lab. But you know, if you wanted the absolute biggest printer you can get for around this price point, Elegoo's pretty much the only game in town. And then of course you've got Elegoo's resin printer lineup. From what I can tell, Elegoo has excellent price to performance, so if you wanted to just get something basic to dip your toes into resin, then you could definitely do it with Elegoo and not have to break the bank. But if you wanted something really big with really high resolution, you can also get that from them as well. Anyone who's interested in getting into resin printing, I would recommend starting out with something really small and cheap like this, just to see if you like the workflow. Because if you buy something expensive and you decide you don't like it, then that's not a very good use of your money. Okay, next up we're going to talk about Sovol. Now, Sovol have recently merged with the company Kobra. I think they make some pretty decent stuff. Now, I would give them a B tier based on most of the printers that I've seen from them. However, they've got a standout printer in the SV08. The SV08, I think, is an S tier printer, which we're going to go and take a look at right now. Here's the Sovol homepage. You know, I'm not super impressed with most of their offerings. It's just a lot of Ender 3 or PRUSA clones that are offered at much less cost, but also, in my experience, the Sovol quality control hasn't been quite there. They take a little bit of tweaking to get working right, which is like, you know, something that a lot of people are used to, and they'd be okay with that given the lower price point. But I feel like they're just not offering enough value for most of their products. However, I think the SV08 has been really an outstanding printer for what it is. I mean, for $540, you're getting a printer with nearly the same print volume as the Creality K2 Plus, 350 by 350, and it's also using a high-speed Core XY motion system. In my testing, it worked pretty well. There was a couple firmware bugs at the initial launch, but this is just a bare bones, essentially Voron 2.4 clone. But they did have their own take on how to make things less expensive to build and easier to put together. So I really like this printer. You can buy it with an enclosure, but apparently that's not on sale. I would definitely get this one that's on the Black Friday sale price. That doesn't come with any enclosure, but I'm sure you could figure something out to enclose it if you really wanted to. I think it's great for a high-speed PLA prototyping machine. That's basically what I'm using my K2 Plus for, so I guess that might be a little bit too much printer for my needs, and I'd probably be better suited with an SV08, but Creality sent me the K2 Plus for free, so I'm going to use that. However, if I was spending my own money and I just needed a basic high-speed Core XY prototyping printer that I don't care if it looks like a milk crate, then I would pick up one of these. And yeah, this thing is really fully open sourced, super moddable. That's the other thing about Sovol is Creality claims to be an open source company and be open source friendly, but actually I think Sovol is doing a better job of releasing more of the documentation that you need to be able to do more advanced modding on their machines. Sovol, I think, is actually a more modder-friendly company than Creality at this point in time. I really like the SV08. I think it's a great deal for a larger format printer like that. And honestly, I don't think anyone else is going to come out with something cheaper that's as good in the similar size and price point. The rest of their lineup isn't quite as competitive. Like I was saying, it's mostly PRUSA Mark IV or Creality Ender 3 type clones, and they're just not super compelling products. They're super open source, but you know, the quality control isn't quite there. They're easy to mod, but you know, they're smaller printers and they're not super cheap, so I'm gonna have to give this one I think I'm gonna give that oof. The thing is it as good as an Ender 3 V3 Plus and the Elegoo Neptune 4 series? It's really close. It's either at the bottom of B tier or at the top of C tier. I'll leave it at the bottom of B tier for now. Maybe we'll get to some C tier printers in a little bit here. Since Sovol has acquired Comgrow, we're going to rank the Comgrow 500. Now the standout feature of this printer is its 500 millimeters cubed build volume. So this is an absolutely massive printer. It doesn't look half bad either. I mean, it's kind of a nice looking printer. But really, the only reason you'd get this is if you absolutely needed that extra space. The Neptune 4 Max is 420 by 420, which is really big, probably big enough for most people. But if you really need that extra 80 millimeters on all sides for a slightly bigger object, then this is a good option for you. It's giving you print volume that really can't be beat. This is one of the biggest printers on the market right now. So for that novelty, I'm gonna go ahead and give it a B tier rating. It's just not as good of a value as the Elegoo Neptune 4 Max here. It's just kind of expensive, it looks kind of clunky, and if you're printing things that big, it's just gonna take ages to get your prints done, especially given that this isn't going to be a high-speed machine. Everything's gonna be moving relatively slowly because it's a bed slinger, and that bottom build plate is gonna be extremely heavy and have to be moved back and forth. However, if you need the novelty of that super large build volume, then you might be interested in getting it. All right, next up we have Anycubic. Now I'm gonna be a little bit harsh here. I think we're gonna have to give Anycubic a C tier. None of their products are really outstanding in any particular way that would make me choose them over a Creality or an Elegoo or a Sovol product. And for the most part, they're just making a bunch of Ender 3 clones. Let's take a look at this. This is the Anycubic Kobra 2 Max. It's the same size as the Elegoo Neptune 4, but it's a little bit more expensive. And also, in my experience, I didn't really like using mine. Sure, it's probably a fine machine. There was just weird things about it that when I had one in for review, I didn't really like it. I tested the Kobra 2 Max and the Kobra 2 base model. Both of them, they didn't nail the first layer quality, and it was just kind of loud, and I had to get some tuning to get it working. It is a functional printer, it works fine, it's relatively inexpensive, but I just don't see why you'd get an Anycubic printer over an equivalent Elegoo printer. So for that reason, you know, we're going to be ranking Anycubic kind of low. The only way you would be able to convince me to buy one of these is if they were insanely cheap, but Elegoo is selling their printers for less than Anycubic, so really not much of a reason to pick those up. Now apparently they've got this printer, which is, we'll take a look at it here. It's their multicolor printer. It's called the Anycubic Kobra 3 Combo. So I guess the Kobra 3 series is going to be coming out with their multicolor units. So you could imagine them coming out with a Kobra 3 Plus and a Kobra 3 Max. Actually, now that you mention it, having a Kobra 3 Max, that's the 420 by 420 by 500 build volume, that also has a multicolor unit, or just being able to automatically switch spools when it runs out of filament, especially for those super large prints that you'd be doing on a printer that size. I can see that being useful. So maybe the Kobra 3 series will turn things around for Anycubic. We'll have a little bit of optimism for them. I don't think this Kobra 3 in the base model is going to be anything that special, just because it's not that big. There's a bunch of other 3D printers that do multicolor in the same size range. But considering that they're probably going to upscale this and create a Plus and a Max version of it, I could easily see those ranking in A or S tier, especially if they were the first to market to make a really large bed slinger that's low cost and can do multicolor. I could easily see that taken up an S tier spot. But for now, given that we only have the standard size Kobra 3, I'm gonna leave it in B tier. But I'm looking forward to those larger models coming out. We'll definitely be able to rank them a little bit higher if they can deliver the goods. Oh, before we move on from Anycubic, I should mention they have a really big lineup of resin printers. So just like Elegoo, they've got a really nice lineup here. And I'm not a resin printer guy. I just don't like that stuff because it smells and it's toxic chemicals that I don't want to have in my workspace. But they look like they're a little bit more expensive than Elegoo. I don't know, maybe someone who's more into resin printing could tell me if there's any reason why you'd want to get some Anycubic resin printers over the Elegoo printers. But yeah, if you're wanting to get into resin, Anycubic is another really well-known brand in that arena. So yeah, I do feel kind of bad putting Anycubic this low. I kind of want to move them up to B tier, but personally, I don't really see the desirability for any of their products, and this is my tier list, so they're going in C tier. All right, next up we have FLSUN. FLSUN is a company that's been getting in a little bit of trouble lately because apparently there's been some botted comments where like it's just obviously a fake commenter leaving comments on videos being like, FLSUN, that's the best company in the world. I love FLSUN, they are so nice. So yeah, that is pretty fishy. The knee-jerk reaction to seeing something like that is to say, well, FLSUN is clearly buying comments and they're trying to trick the community into thinking their products are good. But there's an alternative explanation here. Apparently, according to some sources that have asked FLSUN, they said they have nothing to do with those comments. So there's a potential that this is actually a false flag bot comment operation, where maybe another company that's one of their competitors, they might be coming in with fake comments that are obviously fake and posting them all over the internet to make FLSUN look bad. Now, is that the most likely explanation? I don't think so. I think the most likely thing is FLSUN actually did pay to get those bot comments scattered around on our YouTube videos. And they're obviously fake and it makes them look really dumb, but you know, there's a possibility that FLSUN posted those. But then again, there's the possibility that they have nothing to do with it and they're just getting slandered. I'm just gonna ignore the bot comment controversy altogether when it comes to making my ranking because there's no way for us to know whether that's FLSUN or some malicious actor. However, given their current lineup of printers, I'm still gonna rank them relatively low. We're gonna put them in C tier. Now, why am I putting them in C tier? They've come out with some really cool stuff. I mean, look at this front page of their website. The marketing here is out of control. We've got this awesome floaty 3D graphics going on. Makes you really want to buy one of these. And they're saying that deltas are twice as fast as Core XYs, which I think might technically be true. They can get really insane accelerations and print speeds using this type of motion system. I just don't find their products very compelling. Now, I haven't tried the T1 Pro. I might like that product, but based on my experience with the S1 and the T1 in the base models, I haven't been super interested in using them. They do deliver on their promise of having absolutely bonkers print speeds. If we look at this S1, you know, they make these insane claims like 40,000 millimeters per second squared, 1.2 meters per second max print speeds. I will agree with these two. However, this max flow rate, that is not true. It can't get 110 millimeters cubed per second continuously. Maybe it could do it in a short burst, like if some of the melted plastic was all pre-melted in the nozzle and it was just bursting out a little bit of plastic. But that's a little misleading. I would not consider a burst rate to be anywhere equivalent to a continuous melt rate. I think the continuous melt rate is a lot more meaningful because that's going to actually tell you how fast you can print parts. You got the 8-minute speed benchy, which is absolutely insane, and no other production printer that I've used can even touch that. And you can print out gigantic stuff like this relatively quickly. The metal frame on this machine is absolutely insane. It weighs a lot. I think it's even heavier than the K2 Plus. They put a lot of aluminum into this frame. It's super heavy duty, and they're using carbon fiber rods to have everything be lightweight and as quick as possible. They got that turbofan CPAP cooling. But what really matters when I use a 3D printer is the user experience. And for me, the user experience wasn't great because this CPAP fan that they use is absolutely screaming the entire time the printer is running. It's like 68 to 70 decibels. But I just put a little baffle and stick a sock in it up top. So let's open the door up a little bit and you can hear, you know. I think that's loud enough that if you're exposed to that continuously, it can cause ear damage. Actually, that's not true. According to OSHA, you have to be over 85 decibels of weighted average over an 8-hour workday to be at the threshold where they consider you to be likely to get hearing damage. Being at the upper safe limit of how much noise you're allowed to have in a workplace environment is not a good place to be, and it might not cause permanent hearing damage, but it just really puts me in a bad mood when I'm just constantly listening to loud noises all day. So I didn't like this printer. Same with the T1. The T1 was a little bit quieter, and there's a little muffler you can print out and put over the top of the turbofan intake, which quiets it down a little bit. I think it was like 58-ish decibels. Still too loud for my taste. So yeah, FLSUN, you gotta work on making those printers a little bit quieter. Apparently the T1 Pro is a little bit quieter. According to their marketing materials, it's in the 50s, maybe like 55-ish decibels, which is still louder than I like. Like when you consider some of the other printers that I put in the upper tier here, this Creality K2 Plus, that is around 52-ish decibels. This Adventure 5M Pro, that's around 50 decibels. So these are very quiet machines where I don't mind leaving them running in my office. These FLSUN printers, they're all just too dang loud. So I'm actually going to put them in D tier, all of them. Now, if they can quiet these machines up a little bit and still maintain, you know, the print speed and the cooling performance that you need to be able to continuously print at those speeds, then I would consider moving them up. And actually, I think I'll move the S1 up just because of the novelty factor of it being the fastest printer on the market. Like, that's pretty cool. And I do like this T1 Pro. If it is actually quieter and faster than the T1, then I could see myself being somewhat okay with that printer. Apparently there's a S1 Pro coming out soon, so if that one's quieter and faster than the S1, then I could see that taken up in A slot tier, or if it's super duper quiet, then I'd have no problem putting it up into S tier. But, you know, we'll have to wait and see. For now, just because of the noise of those machines alone, I'm gonna have to rate them pretty lowly. Now, FLSUN asked me if they could use my likeness to promote their products, and I was like, no, I'm gonna have to have a lot of terms attached to that because I don't want you to just use my picture to sell your printer. Like, I want people to see my opinions on the printer and decide whether they want to buy the printer or not. So if you want to embed my video, go ahead and do that. FLSUN, if you're listening, put all of your efforts and attention into making the printer as quiet as possible, because when a loud printer is in my office, it makes me not like it, and it makes me want to throw it off the balcony. We've beat the dead horse enough on the FLSUN noise levels, so let's move on to QidiTech. QidiTech, they're a pretty cool company. Their printers tend to have excellent print quality. They tend to be packed with features, and they tend to make bigger printers than most people would offer at the equivalent price point. So they're giving you those big Core XY high-speed printers that everybody is always asking for. And they've been tending to put heated chambers in their printers when most people have been pretty hesitant to include heated chambers. In fact, of all the printers that we've looked at so far, the K2 Plus is the only one of them that has a heated chamber built into the printer. So QidiTech, they're good in terms of print quality, speed, features, having enclosures and heated chambers and all that kind of stuff. So they're giving you a lot of value for your money. And based on that alone, it sounds like they should be an A tier or an S tier company. However, I'm gonna put them in B tier. Now, there's a lot of positives about the company, but there's also a couple negatives. The main negative for me is that all the printers that they've sent me have been like overly bulky and large. Like they're bigger than they really need to be, and they're clad in these plastic panels that make the machine feel and look kind of cheap. And on their most recent printers, they've moved into having automatic bed leveling and automatic Z offset built into the machines using load cells, so that it's really just a plug-and-play experience. But on basically every other printer that they sell, like their 3 series of products, the X Max 3, the X Plus 3, those were all released last year, but they're still selling them. Sure, the new Plus 4 has that load cell built into it so that it's a really easy plug-and-play experience, but most of their catalog still requires you to break out the little sheet of paper and put it under the nozzle and dial in the exact Z offset. So I'm not a big fan of that, especially on machines that are kind of marketed as being more professional and easy to use. And that plasticiness and their extensive use of proprietary parts that might not be supported in 2 years. So ultimately, they kind of seem like throwaway devices because they don't have the huge mainstream success that a company like Creality has, where the aftermarket will basically support those forever, or a company like Flashforge, which tends to serve a more professional market and they expect better support and longer-term parts availability. With the QiDi printers, it just seems like in 2 years they're going to be out of date and then you're not going to be able to upgrade them or maintain them, and it's just going to be an issue. Add to that, when I took apart some of the QiDi printers that I was sent, they were using plastic threaded fasteners, and I really dislike that because you can only take those apart and put them back together a couple of times before they get all worn out. So they're really not built to last in my experience. Now, a lot of people have given the QiDi X Plus 4 rave reviews. Best printer ever. Almost the best thing since sliced bread, but really it's turning out to be more of a toaster than anything. QiDi had an issue with the solid-state relays that they're using in this machine, so I'm going to have to give it a C tier based on that alone. Now, it's a really great printer in terms of the price, the features that you get, the size. Like, it seems to offer pretty much everything, but if you're launching with a major safety issue, that's going to knock you down a couple points. The solid-state relay is heating up and melting because they didn't account for the difference between voltage on the electric grid in China versus America. Melting electrical components that are handling high power and high voltage systems is really a bad look. QiDi needs to step up their electrical engineering and make their products a little bit safer and pay attention to that stuff a little more before they can get any higher rating than this. In fact, that might actually mean I have to move QiDi down a tier. There was another printer that QiDi came out with where in certain conditions, when you plug the printer in, even with it like not powered on yet, the chamber heater would have mains voltage, where if you poke it with a multimeter, you can read the mains electrical voltage, which is a huge electrical hazard. Like, imagine you're reaching in there, you're grabbing onto a metal table and reaching in there to poke something out of the chamber, and your tool accidentally touches one of those fins. That could potentially electrocute you. So based on what I've heard online, it could be a hazard, and I think they just need to take safety a little bit more seriously. So QidiTech, you're not getting good ratings today. I like what you're trying to produce, but it's just no. Okay, next up, PRUSA is a very old and storied company in the 3D printer market. The original i3 that they launched a long time ago that was based on an open source product was a really great printer that got a lot of people into 3D printing even before the Creality printers were really popular. So this is kind of the old guard of 3D printing. The PRUSA company has worked their way into a lot of professional environments too. So in schools, universities, even a lot of workplaces where they're doing professional work. You can see a lot of these printers. Their main offerings right now are the MK4S and the PRUSA XL, but they've also got the PRUSA HT90, which I'll touch on in a little bit. I think that's a really cool printer, and I got to see one in person at a couple trade shows. It's a really cool printer, but I don't think it's really relevant to this. One of the things I really like about PRUSA is they've been really open to open source. That might be changing in their company a little bit, but at least for the last decade or so, they've really pushed slicer technology into the state that it needed to be for 3D printing to become a mass market thing. Like, the whole 3D printer workflow has gone through a lot of iterations since PRUSA first came out, and I think their software really made it more accessible to more people. And PRUSA slicer is the backbone of basically all the modern slicers that you see on the market today, whether that's Bambu Lab, the new Creality print, Orca slicer. All of that is based on the PRUSA slicer backbone. So for that reason alone, I would want to give PRUSA an S tier. However, one thing that holds PRUSA back from being a super awesome company that everyone would want to buy and own is the pricing on their printers. When you look at what you get for your money with this Mark IV-S, it's really not for everyone. It's not like the lowest budget type printer that you're going to be able to pick up. Like this Creality Ender 3 V3 SE, $179. For the price of one MK4, you could pick up like 8 of these. It's kind of funny to think 8 of these printers for the price of one of these pre-assembled. The price, you know, that keeps it from being an S tier, but it is a really high quality printer that I enjoy using. So we'll give it an A tier. Now the PRUSA XL, I think, is one of the strangest 3D printers on the market right now. It has the largest print volume of any of the Core XY printers on the list. It uses a tool changer, so instead of having one print head that has to flush out all the material before it switches to another material, it just parks the print head that's printing that color, another print head comes out and picks up where that one left off. There's no purging involved. Well, there is a little bit of purging where it just primes the nozzle a little bit to make sure that it's extruding properly when you get over to your print. But the net result of that is there's a huge reduction in the amount of waste that it produces when you're doing large multicolor prints. For example, I wanted to print out a multicolor helmet on my Creality K2 Plus, but it ended up producing so much waste. Like, it's insane the amount of waste material that you produce when you're doing 4 color changes per layer on a print that's 1,000 layers tall. Basically, the amount of poop that it produces in one go, you multiply that by 4,000. It adds up to a lot of material waste. And that's when you would really want to use something like the PRUSA XL that has a tool changer. So because this allows you to do true multicolor printing on large parts without an exorbitant amount of waste, I think this has to be S tier because it's offering something nothing else on the market does. Also, it allows you to use multiple materials, not just multiple colors of the same material. So if you're doing carbon fiber and a carbon fiber support material, you can do that on this. You can do PLA with PETG interfaces for the support material, which makes support material removal much easier. You can do prints that mix TPU and PLA and PETG for those soft rubbery parts, but also having stiffer parts in the same component. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with this printer. And for that reason, we're gonna give it an S tier rating because it's just super unique. In terms of value, it is a lot more expensive than the other printers on the list, but it's offering you a lot more capability and a lot more efficient operation when you're doing a lot of multicolor printing. Some things that I don't like about the XL is the enclosure is a separate add-on that you have to buy and build yourself. And also it has a pretty high MSRP when you're dealing with the 5 print head version. But for those who need it, it's there. And if you don't need it, then just get a less expensive printer like this SV08 or the K2 Plus. All right, next up we have LDO Motors. Now LDO Motors, I think they basically just manufacture motors, so they're not really a 3D printer company, but they do sell 3D printer kits and they sell motors for 3D printers. And if you want that kit experience, I always recommend either get a PRUSA or an LDO Motors kit because I've dealt with some of the other kit printer manufacturers and it just ends up being really difficult. They don't give you all the proper documentation. Sometimes it seems like they haven't even built the thing themselves to see if it works. Versus LDO Motors and PRUSA, those are the 2 companies that I trust to build a proper kit printer that has all the parts that you need and good instructions to be able to walk you through the entire build process. LDO Motors as a company, I'm going to give them A tier. I'm not a big fan of their pricing for their Voron products, but they're offering a service that not a whole lot of people are doing. They give back to open source. They give a platform to kit printer projects that might not otherwise be commercially available. So stuff like this positron and this Rook, you know, building out kits for them and helping those designers proliferate their design and kind of help their dreams come true, I think is a really admirable and positive thing that they do for the community. So for that reason, you know, LDO I feel like has good karma. They did send me a Voron kit to build, and I'm mostly finished with it. I've just got to put some finishing touches on it. It was relatively easy to build, but I do have some gripes with the design overall. I don't think it's the most sturdy printer. I think it's a little bit expensive for what it is. Like, they're not using the most economical part choices. The use of blind joints, it makes it a little bit rickety. There's just a ton of configuration that you have to do just to figure out what parts you need to print. They're using ABS parts for a lot of things. So yeah, there's a lot of good and a lot of bad with this design. I think it all averages out to being about B tier. A lot of people love their Vorons. I'm sorry I don't share the same love for that printer design. It just comes down to ease of use and durability. Like, those are very important metrics for me. It ranks high in modability, but I mean, I think it might be at the point where it's almost a little too moddable, if there is such a thing. The positron, I just think this printer's really cool. Because it's super interesting, I want to give it an S tier, but ultimately I think I'm going to have to bump it down into A tier just because of practicality concerns that I have. I'm planning on making a video about traveling with printers because for the last 2 months I was on the road a lot and I had a couple printers in the back of my car. I printed in my car a little bit. I printed in different locations. I brought them into my hotel, brought it into some hacker spaces, and just saw what the nomad lifestyle with 3D printers was like. And I think I learned a lot of valuable lessons there. One of the lessons that I learned is that the less setup that you have to do on a travel printer, the better. And I think the fact that you have to unfold and attach a couple things and then probably rerun the mesh bed calibration on this printer, I think that would kind of get annoying for me. So in terms of satisfying the goals of being the perfect travel printer, I don't think it's quite there. I think they've got a little bit of work to do. But it is super unique, really cool. It's a high-speed printer. It prints upside down. It uses a bunch of really unique technologies. Next up, we have the Rook by Rolohan. I haven't built one of these yet. I really want to give it an S tier rating. It's just a really tiny, really easy to build, really cheap, super moddable printer. But I haven't built one myself. However, I have a feeling that I would really like it. So I'm going to put it in S tier. I'm not super sure about that rating. You know, maybe if I got one and I built it myself, I would hate it. Just from the surface level look at what I've seen, they do seem really cute and like a lot of fun to build. Kind of like the Voron V0, but even easier to build and lower cost. So yeah, I do like the design philosophy there. All right, next up we have Ankermake. If we take a look at Ankermake, they came out with the M5 and the M5C, and they really haven't done a whole lot since then. Since they haven't launched a new product in, I guess, about a year now, and they've abandoned their V6 color engine, which was supposed to be this really cool multicolor printing capability that they were going to add to these printers. It seems like they might be abandoning ship and giving up on 3D printing, which is a little unfortunate. I'd really like to see what else they can come up with. But ultimately, you know, Anker is a large corporation. They produce a lot of other stuff. And if this division of the company is just sinking cost and not producing value, then they got to stop working on the projects. It's as simple as that. So when it comes to ranking Ankermake, I would give them an A tier. I think they make great products, but ultimately, since they're not super popular and there isn't anything on the horizon about what they're coming out with, we're going to have to leave them in B tier. But I'm willing to bump them up a spot if they come out with some really cool new printer in the future. In terms of actual Anker products that I use on a daily basis, we've got this little iPhone charger here. It just slaps onto the back of my iPhone and powers it up through wireless charging. We've got this gigantic power bank that's like the largest legal size that you can carry on an airplane, and I can power up my laptop. I can plug it into my camera and run that for 8 hours straight on this thing. It's got super high-speed fast charging. There's this little Anker power bank that I use. I basically just plug this into the wall, and then I can plug in all sorts of things for high-speed charging. It's super slim, easy to carry around with you, and it's even got these little plugs on the top. And these plugs do this really cool thing where they expand when you install a plug into them. Do you see that? This is really cool stuff. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Anker products in general. I really like all the stuff that they do, so would gladly see them return to the 3D printing arena. Well, that's about all we have for today. If you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching. I'll leave affiliate links to all the products that we discussed in the video description. If you need to pick up anything for Black Friday, if you use those links, that really helps me out and helps fund the channel and all of this fun content that we make here. And let me know if I forgot any printers that you think deserve to be on this list. There's a lot of competition going on in terms of all the 3D printers that are out there. So let me know if I forgot any of them, and let me know what your favorites are in the comments down below. All right, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next episode.